Next, Dean Christine Elveña from St. Louis University. Dean, kaway. Miss Universe. And lastly, Dean Domnina Rances from Ateneo de Naga University.
Good afternoon, I'm Aaron. I'm from the LEAP, and this afternoon we have this wonderful panel to continue our conversation as we try to look back in the previous difficult years, definitely, but also looking forward to the potentialities of the future. Earlier this morning, we had already the conversation of what was, how it felt like at the beginning of the pandemic. And I feel really strongly that we all can relate to it. You know, we had our own struggles. But it's, I think, also quite equally important to focus as well on the positive side of things, right? On the times when we stood up, despite the hardships, and told ourselves that we can do something about it. This afternoon, we are joined by our panelists who will share something about what they went through, but also focusing on what they tried to do. And hopefully we'll be able to conclude that we did something in our schools and in our experiences. So perhaps I can first start with our dear deans this afternoon. Dean Christine is from St. Louis University in Baguio City, and Domnina is from Ateneo Naga University in Naga City in Bicol. I believe you have a little bit of a presentation to us, Dean Christine, to showcase how exactly it was when you were faced with the struggle of the pandemic, you tried to manage your law school.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, basically, in keeping with the theme, digital world, I prepared a presentation deck just to show that I had improved my craft when it comes to preparing presentations. So, well, basically, while waiting for them to pull up my slides, I'd like to share that our law school is a small law school. The dean and associate dean are part-time employees. Most of the faculty members are part-time employees. And we only have 2 administrative staffs who actually take care of both the law school and the LLM program, including the legal aid clinic. Can you imagine? So, with that said, let me start by saying that we had several struggles when we started with the online setup, simply because the pandemic had forced us into adopting, the digital world as we speak. If we talk about the challenges, I have 3 points to raise. None yet.
So, Dintin, you mentioned about the size of your school. Yeah. How many students do you have in St.
We started with an average of 300 students, but at the present time, we already have about more than 500 students. So that's a bit. But nonetheless, since I think we have technical difficulty in putting a slide, I can start with summarizing the 3 challenges that we had faced. First is enrollment. Imagine us dealing with enrollment. Okay, so my presentation is entitled Challenges, but I always believe that challenges can be turned into opportunities. So let's move on to the next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, I will divide it into 3 aspects. So we have challenge 1. I'm proud. Did you see that? Okay. Challenge 1 is enrollment. It's really difficult to put enrollment system in the virtual world when you got used to enrollment face-to-face. But the beauty in this is we were forced to create an electronic database, and after doing that, it was so good. Second challenge is on lectures. It's really difficult to transform your classroom into a virtual classroom. And third, of course, is assessment, primarily because of academic integrity. Next slide. And so, what we did was to create an entire flowchart of enrollment system so that we can just show it to our students and faculty members and all the stakeholders so that they are fully informed of what this process is. And of course, we prepared all the templates for them so that they can just pull it up from a drive, Google Drive, and they can fill it out and submit it to us online as well. Next slide. So as you can see, our challenges had been turned into opportunities. And I believe if we transform into go back to face-to-face, not entirely face-to-face, we will definitely still adopt this scheme. With respect to lectures, this is not an easy feat because we started with one where it's primarily asynchronous. It's quite difficult because we were looking at not equality but equity because our students are facing different circumstances. So in which case, we did not actually think of equality, but we thought of equity. And because of the difficulty in terms of internet connection, bandwidth, and all the rest, we need to consider all these circumstances, and that's why we focus primarily on asynchronous. But after adopting that scheme, what we did was to conduct a survey because the students are our stakeholders, and this is the reason why when we adopt a new scheme or a new strategy, before we even transform it into a culture, we need to ensure that we conduct a survey. So we have surveys every semester, a bunch of them. And so we transitioned to one where at the present time, we are mainly synchronous but online, and there's this at least 1 hour of asynchronous session because the students requested for that. It's their break so that they can study at their own pace. And of course, we used technology. No, it's really fantastic. I was forced to learn about Canva. I was forced to learn about PowerPoint presentations. I was forced to use Kahoots, and of course, just for me to motivate them to be competitive. There's a cash prize at the end of the game. But then, in the middle of the semester, they would force me to just give away bonus points instead of money. And of course, because of the trainings done during the pandemic, we learned about modular classes. And not to put the learning, so that the learnings will not be put to waste, we continued with this because I think there are courses which can be delivered on a modular base. And then, because we want everything to be written, we wrote guidelines. We wrote the MOPG. We had written everything, basically. And I issued a lot of memoranda, simply because it's not because I wanted to create my own country in our own law school, but because it basically gives a paper trail of everything that had happened. Next slide, please. And when it comes to the delivery of, examinations, lectures, we had conducted survey. In fact, we have 2 important surveys that we give to our students. We call it exit survey. Why exit survey? Because that is the time that we will already graduate. Kasi hindi na sila tangkot. They no longer fear their professors, no? So they can actually give an objective rating of their professors because they are already graduating. And then, in order for us to measure their confidence during the bar exams, because it's really different when you graduate, the confidence level might be different after you take the bar exams. And that's the reason why we also conduct another survey right after they had finished the bar exams, and we call it bar examination survey. And we try to compare the results for both. Next slide. But our main problem with examinations is academic integrity. Quite honestly, this has been a struggle. What we did was to require students, of course, at first we can't really demand students to have 2 gadgets. Again, equity. So what we did was to address all their personal struggles, case-to-case basis. And then, right now, what we did was for the students to have 2 gadgets, and we check the camera orientation so that the students can actually pan out the entire room. We subscribed to Examplify, ExamSoft. And then all students are unmuted. Sorry, we are police officers. Okay. And then, of course, we need to determine now whether it's, by the way, all examinations are being checked by the QA officer, quality assurance officer, and the department heads. And we are looking at the possibility of conducting examinations face-to-face, but only for the mock bar examinations for this semester. So we are toying around the idea of conducting both online and face-to-face. And this is, I think, the hardest project that we had implemented during the pandemic, quite honestly. But this is, I think, the most fulfilling project that we had implemented, or program that we had implemented. This is called Academic Guidance and Intervention. Whenever the faculty members would fail students during the midterms, the faculty members are mandated to speak with the students and tell them how to improve, what went wrong, how would they deal with it. But in this particular program, the faculty members should wear another hat, and not the hat of the professor, but the hat of a coach, a friend, a mentor. And then, of course, there's still surveys and evaluations again. As I mentioned earlier, we have a whole bunch. So with all this being said, you can see that we had already created a structured online program, and this is the reason why we're still continuing with this program. We conducted surveys, and the students would want to continue with the online program, except for some. So in which case, probably, we might offer like several classes for online program and some classes face-to-face. And the reason why we wanted to continue with the online program is because of these individuals. And we wanted to become channels in order for them to reach their dreams. These individuals are those working abroad, those who have medical conditions, and those who are residing in other regions who would want to try the education at St. Louis University, Baguio City. With all this being said, I think we will still continue with the online program because we have these people in mind. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Dean Teen. If your presentation and indication, I think SLU did, an excellent job facing the pandemic. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm also interested to know Ateneo de Naga's university's experience. You can touch on the same areas than Nina, but at the same time, it's also important to note that during the pandemic, you weren't just trying to manage the transition in terms of instruction, but also the time when you started implementing the CLEP, or the law clinic, which is now mandatory among all law schools. I know it's quite obvious that it was difficult, but perhaps you can also share what you tried to do to manage that.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And since Dintin prepared the PowerPoint, I had to do fly also. So, can somebody please pull up my slides? I'm tasked to talk about how our clinical legal education program responded to the challenges of the pandemic. So when the pandemic struck, our CLEP, our legal clinic, was only in its second year of operation. It's called the Ignatian Legal Apostolate Office. And mind you, our students then were only in their third year of studies. That was our pioneer batch. They were the ones manning the clinic since their first year. And at that time, we only have general practice that caters to individual clients who have been rejected by the PAO and the IBP, but their cases have high educational value. That's why we'd take on this client and we'd have one specialized desk. Next slide, please. An unpopular jail restaurant desk. I say it's popular because at that time, our students and even the community, they still do not understand the value of providing aid to persons deprived of liberty. And it was a struggle for us to change their mindset on it. And it was due to the pandemic that we're actually able to change all of these things. So pre-pandemic, next slide please, we have this group of students who would, a small group of students who are very dedicated to the cause. They would do monthly paralegal trainings case consultations with PDLs, and then follow up their cases and facilitate release. And during that time, we were servicing 2 jails, one provincial jail and one city jail. And then during the pandemic, our students were so concerned with the welfare of the PDLs that they raised funds in order to ensure that the PDLs during the lockdown would have sufficient food and access to hygiene supplies like face masks and alcohols. And the PDLs were so grateful. They felt that they were not abandoned. So they told us that they wanted to help in the fight against COVID. They told us that they can actually sew PPEs for the health workers in Naga City. So our students facilitated that project by looking for donors of the fabric for the PPEs and also for the other materials. And the PDLs, they started an assembly line and provided PPEs for all our health workers in the city. Our doctors, our nurses, and other barangay health workers were so grateful that they were, and word began to spread about what they're doing, that people were then asking, how can we help the PDLs in return? So it was now the community's turn to help the PDLs. They provided laptops, computers, video conferencing equipment so that the PDLs can attend hearings, do online case consultations. And because of that, we were able to scale up our jail decongestion desk. Even the jails who were not producing the PPEs were also benefited because there were a lot of donations. And now we're now servicing 5 jails. We've scaled up, and now our community and our students, more importantly, are now more cognizant about the rights and the plight of the PDLs, and they are now more active and more supportive of jail decongestion activities. Okay, so that's the picture of the PDLs sewing the PPEs, and that's the video conferencing equipment. Next slide, please. This one, another desk that we established at the height of the pandemic, was our environmental law desk. Our law school is situated in Bicol. And if you guys don't know, our region is battered by around 15 typhoons a year. And as Bicolanos, we've just sort of accepted our fate. This is how it is. We live a life by preparing for typhoons, suffering their devastation, and then rebuild, pick ourselves up. It's a vicious cycle that kept many of us below the poverty line. But then during the lockdown, we were hit in a span of 2 weeks by 3 typhoons, one of them a super typhoon. And remember, we were in lockdown. We can't do anything. We felt so helpless. And it was during that time, and when there was no electricity, we can't do online classes, we were just mulling around, and we're so disgusted by people celebrating our supposed resiliency that we felt that this has to stop. We have to do something. And so the College of Law thought of mainstreaming the idea of climate change and climate justice to our community. And we look for partners for this. We're so privileged that Client Earth, an international NGO based in London, came to our aid and then helped us. For 1 year now, they've been giving us trainings and then capacity building for our teachers and for our students. And our main goal that we're now doing is we're now going to our barangays. We have 27 barangays in Naga City, and all of our students are conducting trainings to barangay captains and barangay environmental law enforcers. We're teaching them about mitigation, adaptation, environmental laws, and maybe the possibility of even case build-up in order to hold to account the polluters. This is a big project that we hope that we can finally do just so we won't be victims and be stuck in our victimized state. And then finally, we have another desk this is the migrants desk, which also evolved from the pandemic. Because at that time, you remember that we have all sorts of webinars sponsored by all sorts of agencies and development workers. And many of us attended. One of those seminars that we've attended was the Migrants' Rights by the International Pro Bono Alliance, also sponsored by the Asia Foundation. And from there, one of the speakers said that they're actually looking for help because there's this group of trafficked women in Syria who cannot go home and are asking for help to file cases against the human traffickers in the Philippines and in Syria. So I told our clinic, one of our attorneys in our clinic, to get in touch with the people from ITBA. And from then, we got in touch with the POEA, the Interagency against human trafficking. And from there, all of these good people from the government in Syria and in the Philippines, they conducted marathon sessions to educate our students. I think there were around 4 sessions that capacitated our students to be able to interview the victims of trafficking. From there, they prepared the judicial affidavits. The affidavits were notarized by the Syrian embassy. Those were included in evidence packets. And when they were able to come home to the Philippines, these judicial affidavits were used to file cases against the human traffickers. And the mastermind was actually caught. And that's the tweet from the Philippine embassy in Syria. So from all these, we can see that the pandemic actually brought about so many opportunities. And it's really up to us to see the silver lining in things. Thank you.
Thank you, Domnina. I mean, it's one thing to say that there were opportunities, but it's a whole other thing to really, have that kind of accomplishment. Congratulations to the Ateneo de Naga University. And I think this is also a good opportunity to mention that both of the schools of St. Louis University and Ateneo de Naga University were awarded and recognized by the Supreme Court and in the CLEP Summit for their contributions. So congratulations again. All right, so perhaps we'll get back to those wonderful discussions, very inspiring stories. But first, I'd like to give an opportunity to our student to also share his perspective. Do you also have a slide, Sandro?
Sorry,
no slide.
I didn't prepare.
No slide. That would have been, very impressive. But anyway, so Sandro, from your perspective, everybody's always interested in knowing how were the students coping, right? Because all of these innovations will have someone to receive them. In your case, and perhaps the case of your classmates, your friends, how would you describe your coping mechanisms during the pandemic?
Okay, sir. Good afternoon po to everyone. Hello. I think it's important first to highlight po that as law students, we're usually on the receiving end of whatever policies that administrators, professors make. And it's always also important to, as you've mentioned, Dean, a while ago, about the importance of surveys. I think that's really important because I started online learning during the height of the pandemic. Prof. Banyas a while ago mentioned the online LAE. I was part of the online LAE, first online LAE. And it was very challenging because as a law student who is applying for the first time, you don't know what you're going through, you don't know who to talk to. So I guess the main way that we adopted was really to connect to other law students. So there are dedicated Discord channels for law students who are applying all over the Philippines. And when we got into UP Law, there's also a dedicated server for UP Law students and then for our block. So I guess that's the first advantage of technology, the use of technology for adapting in the admission process. And that the same is true for like the enrollment and the classes also.
But would you consider, Sandro, that it was easy at some point? Was it easy for everyone? Or was it really more of a personal journey, like some students maybe had it easy and the others had the difficult time?
Of course, sir. I think some law students, for sure, had difficulty in the application process and enrollment process. I know some of my blockmates who wasn't able to submit their application during the first deadline, and they were only able to submit it after the extension. So definitely there's they had problems in acquiring the necessary documents and other files. So I don't think the experience is the same for everyone. And definitely some of my peers had more difficulty in getting into law school.
Now that you're and now that you're kind of returning to face, what are those things that you still would want to continue doing? It started as perhaps a coping mechanism, but now you're actually enjoying.
I guess, sir, as I mentioned a while ago, the existence of Discord channels and other messaging applications, they are very helpful. And aside from that, some of my professors, they regularly conduct checking up on their students, even online. So they would usually ask us before every class how we're coping, if we're still okay with the online setup. And we have this class this semester where we are conducting face-to-face classes. But whenever the teacher would feel that it might be tedious for some of us, he would recommend if we want to transition back to online learning. So I think that's really helpful.
All right. Thank you, Sandro. Tintin, on one hand, you would look at the innovations you mentioned as something completely welcome. But I'm sure it was different talking to different stakeholders in your school. It comes to the buy-in they have for the systems that you were implementing. Perhaps the students have a different voice, the faculty have a different voice, and then you have the administration as well. Was it difficult? Can you explain to us how challenging it may perhaps be been for you to have everyone buy into your suggestions?
It's really difficult at first because the policies really affected the policies really affected the faculty members, because can you imagine, they didn't prepare any course guide and any part of the learning pockets prior to the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit us, they were forced to learn about modules, about course guides, about the proper, because we already had the syllabus at that time, but the proper materials in order for the students to have a smooth learning. So really difficult on the part of the faculty members. But I think what is more important is the willingness to adapt to change. Because if the faculty members are not really willing to adapt to certain changes, then we will be doomed. But luckily, most of our faculty members accepted the changes. Even the old members of the faculty, they accepted the fact that they should learn about all these digital tools, because I really think that digital tools bridge the educational gaps caused or created by the COVID.
And your administrators, it definitely needed some resources. Were they willing to put in the resources needed for that system to happen?
Well, they gave us the Google Classroom, but I am lucky enough that our faculty members paid for their own Zoom accounts. We informed them that we can charge it to the students, but that's the effect. And we informed them that not all students are economically lucky. So what they did was just to inform the administration that they won't let the administration pay for the Zoom accounts. They would just pay for their own Zoom accounts. But nonetheless, there's Google Meet. But of course, Zoom is better. I'm not advertising.
I understand, Dean. Domnina, may I highlight that your school is also very new, right? You just had your first batch of graduates take the bar exam. I suspect it was very also different in your case, trying to convince the school to invest perhaps a lot of resources to a small, to something that's just starting. What was the process like in your case, convincing your administrators?
I know that we didn't have the budget for anything at that time. When the pandemic struck, we were in the middle of our midterms. And the students were clamoring for cancellation of classes, academic break, etc., etc. And I know that I can't ask for funds from the school because, in fact, we were having budget cuts. Some employees, some university employees were losing their jobs. But I know that we need an LMS. So what I did was, I taught myself how to build one, and I built it for my students.
Hello. Would it be okay to ask now, how do your administrators appreciate your contributions or your accomplishments? Have they changed their minds? Are they now 100% in, or are you still facing, challenges?
I think there will always be that push and pull, but and honestly, I had a very hard time because I was a very young dean then, and I think still now. So there was not a lot of confidence in the things that I want to do, to achieve, but I made sure that they see me doing the work. And I always dialogue with all our stakeholders. For example, when the students were asking to close down the schools, I talked to them and I told them the story about the Marawi siege and the experience of the MSU during that time. This was told to me by Chancellor Alizedni Dito Calanden. During the height of the Marawi siege, MSU Law School strived to keep its door open in order to provide normalcy for its students and for the community. So banking on that, I told my students that I need you here because together we'll be stronger in facing this calamity. I need to know that you're alive. I need to know that you're facing difficulties. If one of you is sick, maybe we can help, we can provide you, we can connect you with doctors, with hospitals, give you hotel rooms. So it has to be a community effort. And they understood that. It wasn't just learning, but it's actually survival, but that we be together. And because of that, we continued. We did not have an academic break. We ended on time all throughout. And all the gamble paid off. Our first batch, 100%.
Congratulations. Do you want to share as well your experiences now? Are they more receptive to you as well, Dean?
Well, I think I didn't really have that problem because I already worked as an associate dean prior to my appointment as a dean of the St. Louis University School of Law. But I really applaud Domnina.
Thank you. Would you say, Sandro, that in the case of student, did you at some point find it already easier to cope with the pandemic? We've heard our deans share about their struggles implementing those systems. From your perspective as students, perhaps in 2021, 2022, did it become easier?
I don't think it's easier for students, sir. Primarily because I think, as I've mentioned a while ago, we're on the receiving end, so there's not much that we can do at the macro level. We just have to adjust individually. But I think it got better when the communication with the professors and administrators became more solid. We became more in touch with the professors regarding the guidelines. We adjusted as we go along the semester. And I think that's when the online learning became better.
Is it okay for you to share to us perhaps some of your personal or maybe your friends' specific study habits or study patterns that they employed during the pandemic?
Okay. So in our block, we have group chats and different messaging apps, but we mainly meet through Discord. So every night after class, we would meet there to study the courses or the cases that we have to discuss the following day. And then this went on through the first semester of 2021. And then in the second semester of 2021, that's when the guidelines are kind of the guidelines are being more lenient as regards mobility. So I was able to meet some of my blockmates then. And the study groups that we were conducting online became face-to-face study groups.
But there is some comment, Sandra, that some people are saying you're not learning enough, that the students who were studying pre-pandemic might have gotten better, more out of their learning. Would you agree with that? Do you think there is a gap?
Well, I think, sir, of course, it depends on the students. It depends on the individual learning habits of students. But I think for most law students, especially those who... Hello? I think for most law students, those who took up law school during the pandemic, I don't think we're that behind as compared to the law students who studied pre-pandemic, because of the several adjustments that our professors made, the LMS, the integration of online learning to like the face-to-face learning right now. So I don't think it's much of a disadvantage on our part. And of course, as mentioned several times a while ago, there are advantages to online learning. So I guess it's we're all adjusting to the situation, and we're all getting the advantages and the disadvantages, and it's up to us how we will utilize these for betterment.
Thank you, Sandra. That's also good to hear. Perhaps a final question before we invite our audience to also ask their questions. Despite what seems to be, glowing commendations from everyone in terms of the school's accomplishments, do you still have those anxieties or fears about the effectiveness of your innovations that you've introduced, in a way that there's still gaps or there's still something lacking in terms of, or something missing from our students' learning? Tintin or Domnina first?
I think that there will always be gaps in any setting, in any system, that's why we always need to improve ourselves every day and look how we can fill in those gaps. But right now, we're now face-to-face, but it's up to our professors if they want to continue with online classes, because of course, there are different reasons for this, but we do see that there's a big difference with regard to online and in person, and it's really more on I'm not sure, but this is just my own observation in terms of the full development of the student and what we're trying to develop in them, particularly the grit, the passion, and also care for fellow human beings. That's hard to teach in an online setting.
Thank you, Tintin.
I think administrators will always be anxious whether the learning is delivered online or face-to-face. But really, I'm excited to know whether our students will do well. Those students who had undergone online delivery of education. And so I'm also excited about the results of this year's exams, because our students who took the bar exams had experienced online learning. And as I mentioned earlier, we had conducted a bar examination survey, and based on that survey, the areas that they had fell short are those areas, are those subjects which they took at the time when the pandemic struck. So that's basically the second semester of academic year 2019-2020. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, the systems had improved over time. So I'm really excited to know the results of the efforts of the faculty members and the administration by the time that, of course, our students will take the bar exams.
Thank you. Hello. So, all right. Thank you, Tintin, and thank you, Tinina. Thank you, Sandra. So at this point, we open the floor for questions. Yes. Any questions from the floor? Yes, Amanda. Prof. Emmer, maybe you could also join us on stage for questions.
I don't really have a question, but I just have to say that I am blown away completely by the caliber of deans on the stage right now. When I see what you're doing and how it goes beyond the call of duty in any sense from the role that I'm sure was on your job description when you were hired, it makes me so grateful that the future of the legal profession is in good hands. You are extraordinary.
Thank you. I guess this is called tough love for most of our students.
Thank you for that comment. We have a question at the back. Yes? No. No question. Any comments? Feedback? Ma'am.
This is not a question, but I join Amanda here in applauding our lady administrators, especially our dean from Naga City. I am encouraged that with our CLEP program, I think there is a field where our services can be morally felt. I have observed that our OFWs, most of them are were victims of traffickers, victims of these recruiters, fake recruiters. Some of them had employers who were not so faithful in giving them their salaries, who were not given the benefits that they were supposed to receive when they signed the contracts. I think this will be a very, very rich field for us to get involved in our CLEP program. I think when I go back to my school, I will, the first thing that we will do is we will probably visit OWA or the Department of Migrant Workers, if this is already organized at our region, to look into these things. Because I know our CLEP, what do you call this? Our CLEP practitioners, our CLEP students, maybe this can be a very good training ground for them, with, of course, with our guidance and our support.
I actually do have a question. So my first question is, would you be interested in having your students talk to people in South Africa who are running law clinics at their universities? Because I'm thinking that then the students can share their experiences of what they did, how they did it, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That would be great. That would be a good idea.
And then the second thing is to... I know the students that I've spoken to who were part or are part of legal aid clinics, some of them have found it very difficult because they weren't given the appropriate, coaching and instruction. So for first, second year student, or whatever year student, I mean, I would battle when suddenly you're face to face with one student in particular told me a domestic violence survivor, a person who's been raped, and you are just a student, and now you are dealing with harrowing stories, post-traumatic stress, which obviously nothing in your legal education and lectures has prepared you for. And so the one student said, but I know that we must learn to put our emotions aside, and that, and I Yeah, so there are some issues there that I would struggle now having to sit down and listen to this testimony. And so how can we expect a student, just some of the things you mentioned, you said you prepared them for the, when they took the affidavits from the trafficked women, but I'm wondering if you can speak to a little bit more, how do you prepare students to hold this appropriately for them?
We'd always start with a briefing process and also a debriefing process, just so we'd be able to talk about the issues that our students might be dealing with because of handling certain sensitive issues. Actually, at the start of our program, our city was tagged as a capital of illegal drugs, of Shabu. And the cases that were coming in to our clinics were mostly drugs cases. And our students wanted to handle those cases. They want to do the research. They want to draft affidavits, interview the people there. But then, suddenly, it was taking a toll on their mental health. And I realized that I am not equipped to handle that. So that's when we hired guidance counselors for our students.
Thank you, Domnina, and thank you for the question. Any more? One last? Before we conclude our panel this afternoon. All right. Well, I guess that's the last question. So, to conclude, I guess I'd also like to share that definitely we began the pandemic with, with fear, with uncertainty. And the reality is that uncertainty still exists today, whether because of the pandemic or because of other concerns that we have in the world. But we also, I guess, have the right to celebrate wins and celebrate triumphs and to identify, recognize, and support those situations where we have tried to stand up to the challenge. We can see students trying to break the isolation, using technology to create spaces for support. You have using distance, precisely distance, as an opportunity to say, we are here. The law students, the law clinic is here, ready to serve the community. And we also have an example where, yes, there are challenges, and the response is to face it head on. With all of the confidence that sometimes is hard to gather. And what Prof. Emmer has highlighted is there are persons, there are human beings behind technology that need to be supported, need to be celebrated. So at this point in time in our journey, we haven't yet found all of the answers, but I think we found hope, and that's very important. So thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you very much to our audience.